Hey guys, tonight we're stepping inside a Viking longhouse. The snow is piling up outside, thick and relentless, but in here it's a different world. The wooden walls creak softly under the weight of wind and ice. But there's a constant orange glow flickering from the hearth at the center of the room. You can almost feel the warmth on your face, the kind that makes your eyelids heavy and your muscles sink deeper into the fur-covered benches. Now, Viking homes weren't exactly known for their luxury. You're not going to find any plush rugs or silk sheets in here. Instead, you've got sturdy wooden walls, low ceilings and beams blackened by years of smoke. The air smells like a blend of burning peat, stewed meat and damp wool. You probably wouldn't last a day in here, but for the Vikings, this was the height of cozy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere particularly chilly tonight, drop your location and the current temperature in the comments. Let's see who's really braving the cold with us. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this, you trudge through knee-deep snow, boots heavy and soaked through. You're half frozen and the wind's biting through your cloak. But just as your fingers start to go numb, you see it, the longhouse, a sturdy, sloping structure with smoke billowing from the roof vent. You can almost hear the muffled voices inside, the laughter, the low hum of conversation. As you push open the wooden door, a wave of warmth hits you, thick and almost stifling compared to the icy air outside. The door groans closed behind you, and your eyes adjust to the dim light. Everything is cast in a golden orange glow, thanks to the central hearth, a long, rectangular fire pit lined with stones, crackling away like it's been burning for hours. The hearth isn't just the heating system, it's the heart of the home. It's where meals are cooked, where families gather to share stories, and where light seeps through the smoky air like a comforting embrace. In fact, archaeologists have found that Viking houses were specifically designed to keep as much warmth in as possible. The long, narrow structure created a wind tunnel effect, drawing air in and out in a way that kept the flames burning steadily. You take a step forward, feeling the crunch of dried rushes underfoot. The floor is covered in layers of straw reeds and animal hides, anything to keep the cold earth from sucking away too much warmth. And above you, wooden beams crisscross the ceiling, darkened by years of smoke but still strong, still holding up against the weight of snow and time. As you make your way deeper into the longhouse, you notice the benches lining the walls, each one draped with thick furs. These aren't just seats, they double as beds when night falls. People sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing space and body heat. And in a Viking household, you wouldn't just be sitting with your immediate family. Friends, workers, even guests would all pile in together, finding whatever sliver of warmth they could claim. Now, the air is thick, almost heavy, and the scent of stew wafts through the room. Over the hearth, a pot hangs from a wooden tripod, its contents bubbling gently. Meat, root vegetables, and herbs swirl together, filling the air with a rich, savory aroma. This isn't just dinner, it's fuel. Calories were crucial for keeping warm, and a hearty stew was the perfect way to fill up before another icy night. Outside, the wind howls against the walls, sending a shiver through the room despite the roaring fire. But in here, there's a sense of calm, a feeling of being tucked away from the relentless winter. And as you settle onto a bench, leaning back against a wooden post and pulling a woolen cloak around your shoulders, you can almost forget the cold entirely. Almost. The hearth isn't just a fire pit, it's the lifeline of the Viking longhouse. Without it, the entire structure would be nothing but a drafty wooden box, vulnerable to the frigid winds howling outside. But with it, the longhouse becomes a warm, smoky sanctuary, a place where people gather, cook, and huddle together through the long, dark winters. You settle down on one of the wooden benches, a thick layer of furs cushioning your back. The hearth stretches before you, long and rectangular, lined with stones that radiate warmth. Flames flicker and dance, sending sparks up toward the roof vent. That vent is the only exit for the smoke, and even then, the air inside remains thick with the scent of burning peat and wood. It's a smoky warmth, the kind that seeps into your clothes and lingers for days. Now, the hearth isn't just about warmth. It's also a vital part of everyday life. Overhead, You can see iron hooks and wooden racks dangling from the ceiling, each one holding something different. A pot of stew bubbles away, steam rising in lazy curls. Strips of fish and meat hang from the racks, slowly smoking over the fire. This wasn't just a one-time meal prep, it was a daily ritual, a constant cycle of cooking, smoking, and preserving food to make it last through the harsh winter months. And as you sit there, you notice something curious. The fire isn't particularly big, certainly not big enough to warm the entire room by itself. But the way the hearth is built, with stones lining its perimeter, means that every inch of heat is being absorbed and slowly released. The stones act like ancient radiators, holding onto the warmth long after the flames die down. It's a simple but brilliant way to keep the room warm without constantly feeding the fire. But here's the thing, there wasn't just one hearth in a Viking longhouse. If the family was wealthy enough, there might be 2 or even 3. One for cooking, one for warmth, and another in the workshop area for tasks like blacksmithing or dyeing cloth. Each fire served a specific purpose, but together, they created a network of heat that spread throughout the house like veins pumping warmth through a body. Still, there was always a delicate balance. Too much fire and the room would become stifling, filling with smoke until eyes watered and lungs burned. Too little and the cold would creep back in, turning the air icy and damp. Maintaining the perfect hearth was a skill, a careful dance of feeding just enough wood to keep the flames steady without overloading them. And then, there was the task of keeping the fire alive through the night. It wasn't as simple as tossing on a log and hoping for the best. Instead, the Vikings would bank the fire, burying the embers under layers of ash to insulate them and keep them smouldering until morning. If done right, a single ember could last for hours, ready to burst back into flame with just a little fresh kindling and a few careful breaths. But the hearth wasn't just about warmth of food, it was also a gathering place, the emotional heart of the home. After a long day of labor outside, family members would settle around the fire, telling stories, singing songs, and sharing whatever news they had heard from nearby villages or trading ships. It was a time to bond, to laugh, to forget the cold for a while. And as the night wore on and the embers dimmed, the conversations would quiet, and people would start to drift off, still seated by the fire, wrapped in furs and woolen cloaks. You can almost hear it, the soft crackle of the embers, the low murmur of voices, the occasional yawn as someone shifts in their seat. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, the hearth still glows with a gentle, reassuring warmth. And as you sit there, leaning back against the wooden wall, eyes half closed, you can't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, you could drift off to sleep right here. If the hearth was the beating heart of the Viking home, then the walls were its skin, a protective layer designed to hold in warmth and keep the cold out. But unlike the sturdy stone castles you might picture from later centuries, Viking homes were built from materials much closer to nature. And those materials had to work overtime to insulate against the relentless Scandinavian winter. You lean back, pressing your hand against the wall behind you. It's thick, solid, and surprisingly warm to the touch. But it's not just wood. Beneath the wooden planks lies a densely packed layer of turf, thick, grassy sod cut from the earth and stacked like bricks. Turf was the Viking answer to insulation, and it worked surprisingly well. Each slab of sod was dense, damp, and heavy, forming a barrier that kept the biting wind from slipping through the cracks. But the walls weren't just slapped together haphazardly. Vikings used a method called wattle and daub, weaving wooden sticks and branches together to create a lattice that was then coated with a thick mixture of mud, clay, and animal dung. Yes, animal dung. You probably wouldn't want to sniff it too closely, but once it dried, it became a hard, durable layer that sealed in warmth and kept out drafts. And if you're picturing some tiny, cramped shack, think again. Viking longhouses could be massive, sometimes over 80 feet long and 20 feet wide. The larger the house, the more people it could accommodate, and the more body heat there was to keep everyone warm. But bigger houses also meant more walls, more turf, more wood, and more upkeep. Now, let's talk about the roof. You glance up and it's like looking at an upside-down ship. The wooden beams curve overhead like a rib cage, creating a sloping, triangular shape that helped the snow slide off rather than pile up and cave the whole structure in. The roof was covered in thick layers of thatch or more sod, sometimes as much as a foot deep. In some regions, people even planted grass on top, turning the roof into a living blanket of greenery. But as cozy as it sounds, all that turf and thatch came with its own set of problems. Insects, for one. Spiders, beetles, and other creepy crawlies loved to nest in the moist, earthy layers. And then there were the leaks. Even the best laid roof wasn't completely watertight, so a particularly heavy rain could send a few stray drips plopping onto your head in the middle of the night. Despite that, the combination of wood, turf, and thatch worked surprisingly well to keep the heat in. Historians still argue whether Viking longhouses were warmer than other medieval homes, but there's little doubt they were effective at repelling the wind. And for the Vikings, that was crucial. Out in the open, the wind could slice through you like a knife. But inside the longhouse, it was just a muffled howl, a distant reminder of the winter you were safely sheltered from. But let's not forget the floors. You glance down, and instead of cold, hard earth, you see layers of straw and rushes, strewn across the ground like a makeshift carpet. These weren't just for comfort. Though they did provide a bit of cushioning, they also absorbed moisture, kept the floors from turning into mud, and acted as another layer of insulation. And if you think that's impressive, wait until you see the interior walls. Some of the more prosperous Viking families had wooden partitions that divided the space into separate rooms or alcoves, creating smaller, more private areas where heat could be concentrated. These areas were ideal for sleeping, and you can almost imagine curling up in a snug little nook, with thick furs piled high around you, and the sound of the hearth crackling nearby. The combination of turf, wood, mud, and straw made Viking houses feel more like earthy dens than structured homes. And despite the rough, primitive materials, the effect was surprisingly cozy. It was like being inside a giant, smoke-scented cocoon, with the outside world held at bay by walls thick enough to muffle even the loudest storm. You close your eyes, letting the warmth seep into your skin, and for a moment it's easy to forget that winter rages just beyond those thick, earthy walls. You're still sitting on that wooden bench, and now you start to notice something. People are everywhere. Men, women, children, even a couple of scruffy dogs, all crammed together in this long, smoky room. It's not just a family, it's a small community. And as your eyes adjust to the dim light, you realize that the benches along the walls aren't just for sitting. They're also for sleeping. You shift slightly to one side, and the thick, scratchy furs beneath you shift too. They're piled high, layer upon layer of sheepskins, reindeer hides, and woolen blankets. The Vikings may not have had mattresses stuffed with feathers, but they knew how to make a bed feel like a warm, furry nest. And considering how frigid it was outside, a nest was exactly what they needed. Now the benches are surprisingly wide, almost as wide as a modern twin bed, and they stretch along both walls, creating a sort of communal sleeping arrangement. There are no private bedrooms here. Everyone sleeps side by side, sharing body heat and furs to stay warm. It's a practical setup, but also a deeply communal one. You wouldn't just be sleeping next to your immediate family. Neighbours, servants, even guests might all be huddled together, packed in like sardines under thick woolen blankets. And those blankets weren't just for warmth. They were a Viking version of a weighted blanket, heavy and comforting, pressing down with that solid, grounding feel. Some were woven from thick, felted wool, while others were stitched together from animal hides. Reindeer and sheep were common, but if you were really wealthy, you might even have a blanket lined with rare Arctic fox fur, a luxury that only a chieftain or a particularly successful trader could afford. But let's get real. Sleeping this close to other people wasn't always the most relaxing experience. There were no walls separating you from that guy snoring like a bear 2 feet away. And in a room full of people, the air could get stuffy fast. The smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and lingering smoke hung heavy in the air, a reminder that personal space wasn't exactly a Viking priority. Still, there was something undeniably cozy about it. You could hear people breathing, feel the warmth of another body pressed against yours, maybe even listen to a lullaby murmured by a mother to her child. And in a world where the wind outside was howling like a wolf, and snow was piling up against the walls, that sense of togetherness was more than just comforting. It was survival. Now let's talk about the kids. Viking children didn't have separate nurseries or cribs. They slept right alongside everyone else, bundled in tiny furs and snuggled up against their parents. and since the nights were long and dark, parents would often tell stories to keep the little ones calm and quiet. Myths of Odin, Thor, and Loki drifted through the smoky air, punctuated by the occasional yawn or the crackle of the hearth. But it wasn't just children who needed comfort. Warriors, too, would sometimes have nightmares, visions of battles, storms at sea, or lost comrades. In those moments, even the toughest Viking could be found curled up in a tight ball, wrapped in furs and whispering a prayer to the gods to keep the dark at bay. And then there were the sick and elderly. Viking society didn't have nursing homes or hospitals. If you were sick, you stayed in the longhouse, surrounded by family and neighbours. And the communal sleeping arrangement meant that someone was always nearby to lend a hand, offer a drink, or throw another log on the fire. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical. Outside, the wind continues to howl, rattling the wooden walls like a restless ghost. Inside, the room is quieter now. The conversation has died down, the hearth has settled into a steady, smouldering glow, and most people are already curled up on their benches, eyes closed, faces relaxed. And as you lay back against the wooden wall, pulling a thick woolen cloak over your shoulders, you can almost feel the gentle rise and fall of bodies breathing around you. A steady, rhythmic lullaby that blurs the lines between waking and sleeping. As the night deepens and the room settles into a hushed stillness, the scent of the stew from earlier still lingers in the air. It's a rich, hearty aroma: meat, root vegetables, herbs, and something slightly smoky from the hearth. But for the Vikings, cooking wasn't just about filling their bellies. It was also a crucial way to keep warm. You can almost hear the soft bubbling of a pot hanging over the fire. It swings slightly as someone gives it a stir, the wooden spoon scraping the bottom with a soft, rhythmic sound. The pot is massive, big enough to feed the entire household and then some. And that's because Viking cooking wasn't a quick, one-off event. It was an ongoing, all-day affair. Imagine it: someone tosses another log onto the fire, sending up a spray of sparks. The fire flares for a moment, then settles back into a slow, steady burn. That heat radiates outward, warming the room, but it also rises up into the cooking pot, where the stew continues to simmer. This isn't just dinner. It's a strategic, day-long heating system. As long as the pot is full and the fire is burning, the entire house stays warm. But what's actually in that pot? Well, it depends on the season. In the depths of winter, fresh vegetables were a rare luxury. The stew is likely made from dried fish or salted meat, preserved back in the warmer months when food was more plentiful. Dried peas, turnips, and onions might be tossed in, along with a handful of herbs. Whatever could be found growing in the snowy landscape or stored from autumn. And then there's the bread. You can almost smell it, a heavy, dense loaf baking on a flat stone set next to the hearth. It's not the fluffy, airy kind of bread you'd find in a modern bakery. This bread is solid, dark, and slightly chewy, made from barley or rye flour mixed with water, and maybe a pinch of salt. It's the kind of bread you have to tear apart with your teeth. Perfect for sopping up thick, meaty stews. Now, picture the scene. People sit clustered around the hearth, passing wooden bowls and dipping chunks of bread into steaming broth. The warmth from the fire seeps through the air, mingling with the scent of herbs and roasting meat. And as they eat, they talk about the day's chores, about the ships anchored in the nearby fjord, about the snowstorm that's supposed to blow in before dawn. But cooking wasn't just a woman's job. Viking men took pride in their ability to cook meat over an open flame, especially when they were out on long trading voyages or raids. In fact, some Viking men were known to carry small, portable cooking pots, hanging them over campfires, and brewing up stews from whatever they could hunt or trade. And then there were the special occasions, the feasts. If tonight happened to be a feast night, the whole house would be alive with the scent of roasting boar or venison. There'd be dried fish strung up over the fire, sizzling as the fat dripped down into the flames. And in the back corner, someone would be stirring a massive cauldron of porridge, sweetened with honey and thickened with ground nuts. But even on a regular night, cooking was more than just a necessity. It was a ritual. The act of stirring a pot, baking a loaf, or roasting a slab of meat was a way to slow down, to focus on the warmth of the fire and the people gathered around it. It was a reminder that even in the middle of a harsh winter, there was still comfort to be found in simple things. A hot meal, a warm hearth, a room full of familiar faces. And when the last bowl has been scraped clean and the pot is finally emptied, the hearth continues to crackle, sending up those last, lazy wisps of smoke. The heat radiates out into the room, warming the benches, the walls, the sleeping bodies wrapped in furs. The stew may be gone, but its warmth lingers in the air, a lingering echo of fire and food and family. The room is still warm from the evening meal, the air thick with the scent of smoke and cooked meat. Outside, the wind howls through the dark, rattling the wooden walls like a restless spirit. But inside, the longhouse is calm, almost sleepy. And now, it's time to settle in for the night. You glance around and notice something peculiar. Everyone's wearing their clothes to bed. There are no nightgowns, no pajamas, no soft linen shifts. Just the same thick woolen tunics, fur-lined cloaks, and leather boots they wore all day. And it makes sense. In a world without central heating, stripping down to your underclothes would be a death sentence. The layers stay on, trapping in every bit of warmth the body can generate. But clothing isn't just about warmth, it's also about status. A chieftain's wife might wrap herself in a luxurious cloak made of imported silk, dyed in deep blues or rich reds. The farmer's daughter next to her, on the other hand, is curled up in a patched-up woolen tunic, its edges fraying from years of wear. And then there are the blankets. You can hear the soft rustle of furs being rearranged as people settle in, each one pulling a thick pelt over their shoulders. Reindeer hides are common, heavy, warm, and slightly musky. The wealthier families might have thicker, softer furs like bear or wolf, while the poorer folks make do with sheepskins, their woolly texture both scratchy and comforting. But it's not just furs and wool keeping everyone warm. There's another less obvious heat source in the room. The bodies themselves. In a longhouse packed with people, every breath, every heartbeat, every twitch and turn generates warmth. And that warmth builds, creating a collective cocoon of heat that hovers just above the sleeping bodies. You lie back against the wooden bench, the fur beneath you pressed flat from years of use. The bench is hard, unyielding, but the furs soften it just enough to make it bearable. You can feel the grain of the wood beneath your hands, the coolness of it contrasting with the heat of the fire. And above you, the ceiling looms low, dark and shadowy. You can just make out the wooden beams crisscrossing overhead, their surfaces blackened from years of smoke. That smoke isn't just a byproduct of the fire, it's also a form of insulation. It rises and settles against the roof, seeping into the thatch and turf and creating a kind of thermal blanket. Not the most pleasant smelling one, but effective nonetheless. Now, as you begin to drift off, the sounds of the longhouse start to blur together. The crackle of the hearth, the steady rhythm of breathing, the occasional cough or sleepy murmur. And in that semi-conscious state, you start to notice other sounds. The wind outside, still howling through the dark. The creak of wooden walls expanding and contracting with the cold. The soft, almost imperceptible scurrying of mice in the straw-strewn floor. But the strangest sound is the chanting. It's soft, almost a whisper, coming from the far end of the room. You squint through the dim light and spot an older woman, her face lined with wrinkles, her hands clasped together as she rocks back and forth. She's murmuring something in Old Norse, a low, rhythmic chant that rises and falls like the wind outside. It's a prayer or maybe a lullaby, something to ward off bad dreams or call upon the gods for protection through the night. In a world where the dark is filled with spirits, trolls and restless dead, it's not unusual for people to sing themselves to sleep, their voices blending with the crackling of the fire and the groan of the wooden walls. And as the chant continues, eyes begin to close, breaths deepen, and the room sinks further into stillness. The warmth from the hearth ebbs, the embers dimming to a soft, reddish glow. Somewhere in the back of the room, a dog whines, then settles down with a sigh. Outside, the wind howls on, but inside, the longhouse holds its warmth, a dark and smoky haven wrapped in layers of wood, turf and fur. You close your eyes, your cheek pressed against the scratchy wool of the cloak beneath you. The woman's chant is still echoing in your ears, soft and repetitive, like the heartbeat of the longhouse itself. And slowly, the sounds around you fade, blending into a single, warm, enveloping hum. The air in the longhouse is thick with the scent of smoke and animal hides, but there's another aroma lingering just beneath it. A faint, earthy scent that seems to come from the very walls themselves. You take a slow, deep breath, and there it is, herbs. Dried bundles of them hanging from the rafters, swaying gently in the rising warmth from the hearth. It's not just for decoration. The Vikings used herbs for all kinds of purposes, from flavouring food to warding off evil spirits. And in a longhouse, where dozens of people slept in close quarters, herbs also served another important function, masking unpleasant odours. You glance up and spot a cluster of dried lavender tied together with a strip of leather, its purple petals faded to a dusty grey. Lavender was a favourite for its calming scent, believed to soothe restless sleepers and drive away nightmares. Closer to the hearth, you see sprigs of thyme and rosemary. More pungent, sharp scents often burn to purify the air and keep away sickness. But it wasn't just about the smell. Herbs had medicinal uses too, and in the hands of a skilled healer, they became powerful remedies. Near the far wall, a woman sits hunched over a wooden bowl, grinding dried leaves into a coarse, greenish powder. You can hear the soft, rhythmic scrape of her pestle as she works, eyes focused, lips moving in a silent chant. That's Dagny. She's the village healer, and right now, she's preparing a poultice for one of the men lying nearby. He groans softly, clutching his ankle, the skin around it swollen and red. Dagny leans over, places a cool, damp cloth against the injury, and mutters a few words to herself, maybe a prayer to Air, the goddess of healing, or maybe just a soothing murmur to calm the man's frayed nerves. The poultice she's preparing is a simple one, ground yarrow mixed with a bit of animal fat to help it stick. Yarrow is a Viking staple, known for its ability to reduce inflammation and stop bleeding. And it's not the only herb she has in her arsenal. You glance over at the wooden shelves behind her and see rows of small clay pots, each labelled with a simple rune. Angelica root for fevers and chills, and chamomile flowers for stomach aches and sleepless nights, whereas nettle leaves to ease joint pain and bruises. The Vikings might not have had modern medicine, but they were masters of using the natural world to treat ailments. And in a world where winters were long and infections could spread quickly, knowing which herb to use could mean the difference between life and death. But not all of Dagny's remedies are so simple. Near the hearth, a small cauldron simmers, sending up puffs of steam that carry a sharp, almost acrid scent. It's a tonic she's brewing, one meant to ward off the dark spirits that are said to roam during the winter months. It's a mix of juniper berries, wormwood, and a splash of honey boiled down to a thick, bitter syrup. You'd drink it in small sips, feeling its warmth spread through your chest, each swallow a reminder that the gods are watching over you. Now, as Dagny finishes binding the man's ankle with a strip of cloth soaked in yarrow paste, she leans back, her eyes heavy. Being the healer is a demanding job, and there's little time to rest, especially when the whole household relies on her knowledge. She brushes a stray hair from her forehead, closes her eyes, and takes a deep breath, the scent of lavender and thyme mingling in the air. And somewhere nearby, a child coughs, a deep, rasping sound that echoes through the longhouse. Dagny's eyes snap open, and before you know it, she's back on her feet, reaching for a clay pot filled with dried chamomile flowers. Another night, another sick child, another dose of herb-laden tea to brew. You close your eyes, letting the earthy, herbal scent wash over you, feeling its warmth settle in your chest. The longhouse is still, save for the soft crackling of the hearth and the quiet, steady scrape of Dagny's pestle as she grinds herbs late into the night. As the night deepens and the longhouse settles into a quiet, almost hypnotic rhythm, you feel yourself lulled into a state of gentle relaxation. The crackle of the fire seems to sync with your heartbeat, slow and steady. You're no longer quite aware of where your body ends and the warmth of the longhouse begins. But there's something you can't ignore. Something that's been bothering you all evening, just beneath the surface. You glance up at the ceiling again, noticing the way the smoke has stained the beams. It's not just the smoke, there's something else. The walls, the floors, even the ceiling are alive with movement. Not the kind of movement you're used to, the creaking of wood or the soft scurrying of rats, but something far stranger. It's the moss. The thick, spongy moss that's been allowed to grow freely in the corners, where the walls meet the ceiling. Vikings didn't just decorate with herbs and fur. They also utilized the natural world to build their homes, and moss. Yes, moss was one of their secret ingredients. It's easy to overlook, but the truth is, moss was essential to the comfort of the longhouse. It was a form of insulation, and a clever one at that. In the harsh, cold winters of Scandinavia, the thick layers of moss were placed between the walls, beneath the turf, and even in the roof itself. Not only did it help to retain heat, but it also kept out the wind and the damp. You can imagine the process now. First, they would strip the turf off the ground, then dig down into the earth to find the perfect, thick patches of moss. Once harvested, they'd lay it on the roof and walls, packing it tightly so that no air could get through. When finished, the walls and ceiling would be a dense, living quilt of earth, moss and thatch. You can almost picture it now, the moss slowly absorbing the warmth from the fire, holding onto it like a sponge, making the inside of the house feel just a little bit cozier. And with the wind howling outside, you know that the air inside the longhouse will remain calm and warm, sheltered from the freezing cold that threatens to invade every crack and crevice. In fact, the moss worked so well that it became an essential part of Viking architecture, one they relied on for both comfort and survival. Without it, the longhouses wouldn't have been nearly as warm, and the people inside would have been much more vulnerable to the biting cold. But there's more to the moss than just practicality. In Viking mythology, moss was also associated with the supernatural. It was said to have mystical properties, and certain types were believed to bring good fortune or protect against bad spirits. Some even thought that the moss growing on the roof could act as a shield, keeping the spirits of the dead from entering the home. You wonder if that belief was still floating in the back of the villagers' minds as they settled down for the night. Maybe it wasn't just the fire keeping them warm. It was the moss, too, its quiet, protective presence surrounding them as they slept, guarding them from the harshness of the world outside. As you continue to lie back, the soft hum of the longhouse feels almost comforting. The crackling of the fire blending with the gentle rustle of the moss above. The smell of herbs and smoke fills the air, and all around you, the soft murmur of breathing and whispered prayers creates a soothing, almost meditative atmosphere. It's easy to forget that, in a world so wild and uncertain, the simple things like a moss-covered roof or a thick woolen cloak can be the difference between warmth and death. And maybe, just maybe, the Vikings knew more about cozy living than we give them credit for. The fire burns low, casting flickering shadows that dance on the walls. You can feel the warmth beginning to seep deeper into your bones, and you allow your thoughts to drift, following the soft rhythms of the longhouse. But soon, another question arises, one that had been lingering on the edges of your mind since the moment you stepped inside. How exactly did the Vikings keep their homes so warm when the cold outside could freeze the very breath in your lungs? It's easy to assume that their sturdy wooden walls and thatched roofs were the key to their winter coziness. But in reality, the real trick was their ingenious heating system. You've already seen the fire at the center of the longhouse, but it wasn't just any fire. It was part of a carefully planned system designed to keep the whole structure warm. Imagine yourself standing near the hearth, its low flames crackling cheerfully. The smoke rises in a steady column, disappearing into the chimney above. But it's not just the warmth of the fire that's keeping you comfortable. Beneath the floor, hidden from view, are channels of stone or clay designed to circulate the heat throughout the house. These channels form a rudimentary, but highly effective form of radiant heating, using the natural materials of the earth to capture and disperse heat. Vikings didn't have access to modern central heating systems, of course, but they were remarkably resourceful when it came to staying warm. The longhouses were designed to be long and narrow, which helped to trap heat. With only a few small windows and doors, the warm air generated by the fire had nowhere to escape. Instead, it radiated outward, warming the walls and floors, and by extension, everyone inside. It's amazing to think about how such simple methods could have been so effective. In fact, historians still argue about how much of Viking heating was based on trial and error versus advanced knowledge, passed down through generations of skilled craftsmen. Some think the knowledge came from trade routes that stretched across Europe and beyond, while others argue that it was purely an organic development born from the harsh Nordic winters. Either way, it's clear that the Vikings understood the importance of keeping the cold at bay. But even with their efficient heating, the Vikings didn't rely solely on fire. They also made use of animal skins, woolen blankets, and fur to insulate themselves from the cold. You can imagine how thick the furs must have been, The warmth of a bear pelt or a reindeer hide draped over your shoulders as you settled into your bed, wrapped in layers of soft wool. You turn your gaze toward the sleeping arrangements, a long row of mattresses stacked up on raised wooden platforms. Each mattress is made from straw, topped with furs, and surrounded by heavy woolen blankets. It's not a luxurious setup by any means, but it's practical. The furs and blankets trap the heat from the body, ensuring a warm and restful sleep, even when the temperatures outside are well below freezing. The raised platforms themselves are another key to staying warm. As you lie there, you realize that the Vikings were experts at using every available space in their longhouses to their advantage. The raised platforms help keep the body away from the cold, damp ground, which could chill you to the bone, especially in the winter months. As you watch the fire burn low and the longhouse settle into a peaceful hush, you feel a quiet sense of awe. The Vikings weren't just fierce warriors, they were incredibly resourceful too. In a world where the seasons could make or break you, they found ways to thrive. Their ability to create warmth, comfort, and even a sense of security in the midst of harsh winters speaks to their resilience and ingenuity. As you close your eyes, imagining the cozy warmth of the longhouse, you feel a deep sense of calm. You may not be surrounded by firewood and furs, but the warmth of the Viking spirit is still with you, carried through the centuries by their stories and their homes. The night continues, and the longhouse seems to breathe with you, the creaks and groans of the wooden beams blending seamlessly with the gentle crackling of the fire. The soft glow from the hearth warms the air around you, and the scent of animal fur, herbs, and smoke settles comfortably in your senses. But as the wind howls outside, there's something else that catches your attention, the faint hum of the earth beneath you. It's not an obvious sound, but you can feel it if you focus. It's as if the very ground beneath the longhouse is alive, pulsing gently with the heat from below. This, too, is part of the Viking secret to staying warm, the earth itself. Much of the longhouse's warmth came not just from the hearth, but from the ground itself, thanks to a clever technique known as earth sheltering. Viking longhouses were built with their floors dug slightly into the earth, and that was no accident. The soil below the floor acted as a thermal mass, absorbing the heat from the fire and slowly releasing it into the house, creating a steady, comforting warmth that lasted throughout the night. As you lie there, you can imagine how this might have felt. The soft warmth of the ground, the fire above, and the thick layers of moss, animal pelts, and wool all working together to create an environment that was as cozy as it was protective. This was a home that stood firm against the biting cold of the outside world. This type of construction wasn't unique to the Vikings, but they certainly perfected it. Many other ancient cultures used earth sheltering, but the Vikings were particularly adept at taking full advantage of the cold, hard winters. By using the ground to regulate the temperature inside the longhouse, they were able to conserve energy and ensure that the home stayed warm even during the coldest nights. Of course, it wasn't just the longhouses that made use of the earth's warmth. The Vikings also used the surrounding land in other clever ways. For instance, many farms had dug out storage pits for food, which were used to keep crops from freezing during the winter months. The earth acted as a natural refrigerator, maintaining a constant, cool temperature for preserving grains and vegetables until they were needed. It's hard to overstate how much the Vikings relied on their deep understanding of the land around them. And yet, there's a strange sense of nostalgia to all of this. The idea that humans once lived so closely with the land, using its natural properties to create comfort and warmth, seems so foreign now. In today's world, we have heaters, electric blankets, and climate control systems. But in the Viking Age, everything was more organic, more intimate. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a part of the earth itself, woven into the very fabric of the landscape. As you settle deeper into your warm bed of furs and wool, you realize how different the Viking experience must have been. They didn't have the luxury of modern conveniences, but they did have something more primal, an understanding of nature, and the ability to use it to not just survive, but to thrive. You feel the quiet hum of the earth beneath you again, and it brings a deep sense of peace. The Vikings' world was harsh, unforgiving, and often brutal. Yet, in the middle of that world, there was a soft, comforting warmth that came from their clever use of the land and their homes. It's a lesson that echoes through the centuries in a world full of uncertainty. Sometimes the simplest things, earth, fire, and the wisdom of the past, can bring the greatest warmth. The fire is nearly spent now, the last embers glowing faintly like fading stars in the dark sky above. The longhouse is quiet, save for the rhythmic breathing of those around you, and the occasional murmur of sleep. Outside, the wind still howls, a reminder of the fierce world beyond the walls. But inside, there's a different kind of peace, a soft, constant warmth that wraps around you like the embrace of a loved one. As you lie there, lost in the soothing warmth, you can't help but think about how the Vikings were able to achieve this kind of comfort in such a rugged and harsh environment. You've heard about the clever ways they used moss and the earth to keep their homes warm. But what about the finer details, the little things that made the longhouse not just a shelter, but a true home? One of those details was the way the Vikings divided their living space. The longhouse, after all, wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a centre for family life, work, and socialisation. But rather than one vast open space, the longhouse was divided into sections, each serving a different purpose. Imagine the warmth you feel as you look around and take in the low wooden walls that separate different areas of the longhouse. In one section, there's a hearth where food is cooked. The air smells of roasted meat, the crackle of the fire adding to the comforting ambience. In another section, there are sleeping platforms arranged in neat rows where people sleep side by side, wrapped in furs. The family area, where stories are told and decisions are made, sits in another corner, a place where people can come together for warmth and conversation. These divisions weren't just for practical purposes, they were designed to create a sense of intimacy and community. Vikings were known for their close, knit families, and the design of the longhouse reflected this. By separating the space into different sections, it allowed for both privacy and togetherness. It ensured that even in the midst of a crowded house, you could still find a space where you felt safe and comfortable. Historians still argue about how strict the divisions within the longhouse were. Some say they were more symbolic, a way to demarcate areas for certain activities or family members. Others suggest that these divisions were more functional, with each section designed to serve a specific purpose, like keeping the smoke from the hearth away from the sleeping areas, or ensuring that the cooking fire didn't interfere with the warmth needed for sleeping. But one thing is clear, the divisions in the longhouse weren't just physical, they were also social. The Vikings may have lived in tight quarters, but the design of their homes allowed for a sense of personal space and organisation that helped maintain harmony in the community. As you settle in further, you imagine the sounds of the longhouse around you, the low hum of voices in the family area, the crackling of the hearth, the soft rustle of furs and wool as people adjust their blankets. Even though you're lying in a small space, you feel a sense of quiet contentment. This, you think, is the real secret of the Viking longhouse, not just its warmth, but its ability to create a space where people could truly live together. The warmth of the fire, the protection of the walls, and the sense of community all come together to create a feeling of home. And as you drift deeper into sleep, wrapped in the warmth and comfort of the longhouse, you understand why the Vikings were able to survive. Thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They didn't just build homes to withstand the cold. They built homes that could nurture their spirits as well as their bodies. The night has deepened now, and the once vibrant fire is little more than a bed of glowing embers. The longhouse seems to settle into a comfortable rhythm, a lull that stretches into the soft stillness of sleep. But your mind remains alert, stirred by the soft flickers of warmth and the feeling that you're a part of something ancient, something enduring. As you lie there, you begin to wonder, what else did the Vikings do to make sure their longhouses were as comfortable as possible during the brutal winter months? After all, the fire alone couldn't be the only solution to surviving the cold. What about the tools they used to keep the cold from creeping in? What about the materials? And as you think about it, you realize that the Vikings were incredibly resourceful when it came to building their homes, using the natural environment around them to create warmth, comfort, and even protection. While the fire and the earth were essential elements, the materials that the Vikings chose for their longhouses also played a huge role in maintaining a warm and cozy environment. The walls of the longhouse were typically made from timber, but they were often covered with a layer of insulating materials, like moss grass or even animal hides. These materials weren't just for decoration. They served a very practical purpose: insulation. By layering these natural elements on the walls and roof, the Vikings created a barrier against the cold. Think about it. The thick fur of a bear or the insulating properties of moss or grass might seem like an odd combination at first, but it was an incredibly effective one. The Vikings were no strangers to the cold, and they had learned that the more insulation they could add to their homes, the warmer they would be. Interestingly, this kind of building technique wasn't unique to the Vikings. Many other cultures around the world also relied on natural materials for insulation, such as the Native American pueblos, the Siberian yurts, and even the traditional Swiss chalets. But the Vikings' use of animal pelts, moss, and grass was particularly well suited to their environment, and it helped them stay warm during the harsh Nordic winters. Historians still argue about the precise construction methods used by the Vikings. Some suggest that they used a method known as wattle and daub, where wooden frames were filled with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal hair. Others argue that the Vikings relied more on simple wooden structures, covered with thick layers of organic insulation. In either case, what's clear is that the Vikings knew how to use what was readily available to keep themselves warm and comfortable. In addition to insulation, the Vikings also made use of their roofs to help regulate temperature. Viking roofs were typically steep and sloped, designed to shed the heavy snow that could accumulate during the long winters. This design not only helped keep the roofs from collapsing under the weight of snow, but it also allowed air to flow more freely around the longhouse, preventing the buildup of moisture and dampness. As you think about these layers of protection, the moss, the firs, the wooden beams, the thatched roofs, you begin to appreciate just how carefully crafted Viking homes were. They weren't just functional structures, they were finely tuned to the needs of their inhabitants, combining practicality with a deep understanding of their environment. Now, as you settle into the warmth of your blankets, wrapped in the comfort of the Viking longhouse, you realize that these homes weren't just places to sleep. They were places to live, to create memories, to share warmth, and to survive the harshest winters the world could throw at them. And it wasn't just the materials or the fire that made them cozy. It was the connection to the land, the community, and the ingenuity of the people who built them. You close your eyes, feeling the gentle warmth seep into your skin, and you understand, at last, why the Vikings managed to not only endure, but flourish in such a cold, unforgiving world. Their homes weren't just built to last. They were built to make life in the harshest conditions feel like home. As you lie in the warmth of the longhouse, the silence around you feels almost complete. The fire's glow has now almost fully faded, but a soft heat still rises from the hearth, filling the space with a quiet comfort. The wind still howls outside, but within these walls, the world feels distant, safe, and almost timeless. You begin to drift, but something keeps your mind curious. The longhouse wasn't just a physical structure, it was a microcosm of Viking society. Every element of it had meaning. In many ways, the Viking longhouse was more than just a home. It was a reflection of their way of life, their values, and their connection to the world around them. You might think of it as a place where people ate, slept, and stayed warm, but in reality, the longhouse served as a hub for everything. It was the heart of Viking life, the place where warriors returned to rest after battle, farmers found respite from their hard work, and families gathered to share stories, food, and warmth. As you think about it, you realize that the longhouse was also a place where the Vikings showed off their wealth and status, albeit in a humble, practical way. The Vikings were known for their skills as craftsmen, and many longhouses were adorned with intricately carved wooden beams that told stories of their family's history, their journeys, and their accomplishments. These carvings often depicted battles, ships, and animals, telling a story about the family's lineage and their place in the world. But not all longhouses were the same. Depending on the status of the family, a longhouse could be large and impressive, with multiple rooms and finely crafted wooden furniture. The wealthier Viking families might have decorated their homes with tapestries, fur rugs, and beautifully woven blankets. For others, the longhouse would be more simple, with the most basic of furniture, wooden benches, a hearth, and a bedroll on the floor. But the function of the longhouse was the same. It was a place to gather, to survive, and to make it through the cold, harsh winters together. Historians still argue whether these wooden carvings had any deeper symbolic meaning. Some scholars believe the carvings were purely decorative, while others suggest they were used for storytelling or even religious purposes. The designs could have served to ward off evil spirits or ensure the family's protection. Either way, it's clear that the longhouse was more than just a shelter. It was an embodiment of Viking culture and identity. In some ways, it's easy to see the longhouse as a purely functional structure. After all, it was built to keep people warm and safe. But as you lie there, thinking of the carved beams and the sense of history that fills the space, you can't help but feel that there's more to the story. The longhouse wasn't just a physical shelter. It was a place where culture, identity, and family life were deeply intertwined. Now, as you continue to settle into the cozy warmth of the longhouse, you begin to understand that the Viking longhouse was, in many ways, a microcosm of the Viking worldview. It was a place where survival and community coexisted, where people came together not just to stay warm, but to stay connected to their past, their land, and each other. In this space, everything had meaning. The fire, the walls, the beams, and even the air itself. Everything worked in harmony to create a space that was not only warm, but full of life. As you drift closer to sleep, you begin to appreciate how the Vikings' homes were more than just shelter. They were symbols of resilience and community, spaces where life was lived in its most intimate, meaningful form. As your thoughts wander, you realize something important. The Viking longhouse wasn't just about warmth or comfort in the physical sense. It was also about the sense of security it provided. After all, the Vikings lived in a world where danger could strike at any time. Raids were a constant threat, and the longhouse, with its sturdy walls and communal layout, served as a kind of fortress. The warmth of the hearth and the closeness of the people within those walls weren't just comforting, they were essential to survival. The structure of the longhouse itself was incredibly resilient. With its thick timber walls, steeply sloped roof, and thatched covering, it could withstand the fierce winds and heavy snow that would batter the Nordic landscape. But even beyond its physical defenses, the longhouse was a place where the Viking family could find strength in numbers. Unlike many other cultures, which often placed value on individual wealth or status, the Vikings had a strong emphasis on community. The longhouse was a place where family, friends, and even neighbors could come together, sharing not just warmth, but protection. Imagine yourself in the Viking world. It's winter and the wind is howling outside, carrying with it the bite of ice. But inside, the air is thick with warmth, the smell of roasting meat, and the sounds of family and friends. The fire burns steadily, casting its flickering glow over the faces of those gathered around it. In a world full of uncertainty, that fire and the shelter of the longhouse was a symbol of security. It represented the bond that tied people together, a kind of unspoken promise that they would face whatever came their way as a community. Historians still debate the extent to which Viking society relied on these communal living arrangements. Some argue that the Vikings were more independent than we often think, each family unit functioning almost like a small independent tribe. Others suggest that the communal aspect was far more pronounced, with longhouses serving as centers of social life, where not just family but also the greater community gathered for meals, celebrations, and collective decision-making. What's certain, though, is that the longhouse was designed to bring people together, providing both physical and emotional warmth in times of need. But what about the people who lived in the longhouses? The family members who huddled together on cold nights, seeking warmth not just from the fire, but from each other. The Viking family unit was a strong one, built on shared responsibility and mutual care. In a society where survival often depended on the strength of relationships, the longhouse served as the foundation for those bonds. Husbands and wives, parents and children, even extended family members, all lived together in close quarters, working side by side to ensure the survival of the group. In these moments of shared warmth, the Vikings also created memories. They told stories of their ancestors, shared news from the outside world, and planned for the future. But there were also moments of quiet, simple joy, the laughter of children, the sharing of meals, and the sense that for a few precious hours, The world outside could wait. Now, as the final embers of the fire begin to fade into the quiet of the night, you reflect on the longhouse as a symbol of Viking resilience. It wasn't just a building. It was the heart of the Viking world, a place where people came together, survived together, and thrived together. The warmth and security it provided were more than physical comfort. They were a reminder of the strength of the Viking spirit, the power of community, and the ability to endure, no matter what challenges the world might throw their way. As you prepare to drift off to sleep, you realize that the longhouse wasn't just a structure. It was a testament to the Vikings' ingenuity, their ability to adapt, and their unwavering commitment to one another. In its warmth, its security, and its community, the longhouse encapsulated everything that made Viking life possible, even in the harshest of winters. By now the fire is nearly gone, but you don't feel the chill creeping in. The Viking longhouse, even in the absence of a roaring blaze, still seems to hold on to its warmth. And as you lie there, tucked into your blankets, the noise of the outside world fades further and further away. The wind that howled earlier has settled into a soft whisper, and the only sounds you hear now are the faint murmurs of the family around you, the quiet sounds of sleep, the warmth of bodies close together, and the rhythm of a peaceful communal life. In the end, what made the Viking longhouse so incredibly cozy wasn't just the fire, the insulation, or the strong timber. It was the sense of connection, the shared experiences, and the sense of safety that came with being part of a community. The warmth you feel isn't just from the hearth, but from the bonds of family and friendship that fill the space. The longhouse was more than just a shelter from the cold. It was a sanctuary, a place where the harshness of the world outside could be kept at bay, if only for a little while. You think back over everything you've learned about Viking life. It's easy to imagine the Vikings as fierce warriors, raiding distant lands and carving out their empire. But in moments like these, nestled in the warmth of the longhouse, you begin to understand that there was another side to their lives, one that was quieter, more intimate, and just as vital to their survival. It wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about creating a home, a place where people could come together and endure the harshest of winters. Historians often focus on the Vikings' exploits, their raids, their journeys, their battles. And yet, as you lie here in the stillness, you realize that the heart of the Viking world was not in far-off lands or the clashing of swords. It was in the simple, everyday moments of survival, warmth, and connection. The longhouse, with its flickering hearth and the close-knit community it housed, was a symbol of everything the Vikings valued most: family, tradition, and the enduring power of the human spirit. As you let your mind wander one last time through the world of the Vikings, you find yourself gently slipping into sleep. The fire is nothing more than glowing embers now, but the warmth remains. The world outside the longhouse is cold and distant, but here, in the safety of this ancient, welcoming space, you are cocooned from it all. You feel secure, you feel at home, and you understand that the Vikings didn't just survive the harsh winters. They found a way to make them bearable. Now, with the last flicker of warmth from the fire, the world grows even quieter. You are gently rocked by the calm rhythms of the longhouse, the steady pulse of the family's sleep around you. You're wrapped not just in your blankets, but in the comfort of knowing that, for the Vikings, home was more than just a building. It was a place where warmth wasn't just a physical sensation. It was the very core of what kept them alive and connected season after season. As your breath slows and your body relaxes further, you can almost hear the soft murmur of Viking voices, the gentle whispers of a community at rest. You close your eyes, feeling the safety and warmth of the longhouse wash over you. And with that, you finally surrender to sleep.